today's lesson is called The Devil and Tom Walker. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff.
I'm Roger, and today we're going to continue summarizing our featured story, The Devil and Tom Walker. So, yeah, what's going to happen next? Well, we'll tell you that, but we'll first kind of review what we talked about last time. It's all kind of about Captain Kidd's treasure, and Tom Walker is a wretched, greedy fellow, and he just happened to come across this kind of peculiar guy in an old fort, actually, and this guy was called Old Scratch, and he said, well, I'll tell you where that treasure is there, Mr. Walker, but it's going to come at a price. Well, Tom needed to think about it, so he went back home to talk to his wife about it. His wife, who's even greedier than he, came back to get the loot, but she disappeared. So Tom was kind of bummed out about that, so he set off to find Old Scratch and to try to get that treasure to compensate for the loss of his wife.
Yeah, I don't think he's too worried about his wife and losing her all that much. He's thinking, you know what? I'll find Old Scratch, we'll get this treasure, make some money, and you know what? I'm a greedy guy. So I'll have enough money that I won't have to worry about my wife anymore. Everything will work out. Everything will balance out at the end. I will be compensated for my loss. Anyways, it does turn out that Tom finds Old Scratch and they begin to bargain. And we're going to talk about that right after a short break.
Part of Tom's bargain with Old Scratch was that Tom was to use his ill-gotten wealth to serve the aims of his new master. First, Old Scratch asked Tom to become a slave merchant, but that work was beneath even Tom, so he finally agreed to open a loan office in Boston. Business was lucrative, and Tom soon found himself making money hand over fist. The luxuries his earnings afforded him, however, never eased the anxiety he felt knowing someday Old Scratch would come for the rest of his payment.
各位好，第一部分我们看到形容词 lucrative 指赚大钱的或是获利丰厚的。例如 Teddy has a lucrative jewelry business. Teddy 有一份赚钱的珠宝事业。或是 Bonnie received a lucrative job offer from a prestigious advertising company. Bonnie 获得一家著名广告公司待遇优渥的工作机会。接着我们看到片语 hand over fist 常搭配 make money 或是 lose money 来表示快速赚钱或是惨赔。像是 We were making money hand over fist selling cold drinks on a hot day. 我们在热天里卖冷饮大赚了一笔。或是 According to the report, most airlines around the world are losing money hand over fist. 根据这篇报道，全球大多航空公司都在惨赔。再来，我们看到名词 earnings 指个人的薪资、收入或是公司的利润。举例来说 Henry hates to talk about annual earnings during family dinner parties. Henry 讨厌在家族晚宴上讨论年收入的话题。或是 Based on its earnings last year, the company is doing well. 根据去年的收入来看，这家公司营运状况不错。另外，这个字去掉字尾 ings 就成了动词 earn 指获得或是争得，像是 earn somebody something 就表示为某人取得某物。我们可以说 Jack's stellar sales performance has earned him the reputation of being the best employee. Jack 漂亮的销售成绩为他博得最佳员工的名声。
Okay, so let's continue talking about the plot of our featured story, The Devil and Tom Walker. Now, part of Tom's bargain with Old Scratch, part of the deal there, was that Tom was to use his ill-gotten wealth to serve the aims of his new master. So here we're talking about the wealth as being ill-gotten. And if something's ill-gotten, that means you got it by dishonest means. You cheated somebody. You stole it.
There you go. If it's ill-gotten, it means you must have done something wrong to get that. Anyways, Now, first, Old Scratch asked Tom to become a slave merchant, but that work was beneath even Tom. So he finally agreed to open a loan office in Boston. So Old Scratch says first, be a slave merchant. And Tom says, no way, I could never do that. I'm a wretched guy, I'm a greedy guy, but I can't do that. That's way beneath me, even. So what I'll do instead, Old Scratch there, how about this? Let's open up a bank, a loan office there in Boston.
Okay, so that's what they're going to do. A loan office is just a place where they loan people money and then the people have to pay them back, usually at a high rate of interest. Now, business was lucrative. Lots of people wanted to borrow money there for various projects. So if your business makes you a lot of money and it's quite successful, then you can describe it as lucrative. It was a lucrative business. Business was good, and Tom soon found himself making money hand over fist, which means basically he was making a lot of money. I think this term hand over fist originally referred to sailors winding rope up or something like that, and later on it came to mean that they were just making a lot of money, and it's usually used when we describe making money, just making a ton of money.
Yep, he's making money. You can say, my Uncle Don made a huge investment in the stock market. And now he's making money hand over fist. Good for him. He made a good investment, and now he's raking in the moolah. Money is coming in hand over fist. He has so much money, he doesn't know what to do with it. Anyways, the luxuries his earnings afforded him, however, never eased the anxiety he felt, knowing someday Old Scratch would come for the rest of his payments. So he's loaning people money, and he's making a lot of money by doing so. But he owes a great debt to Old Scratch, and he's not exactly sure when Old Scratch is going to say, hey, pay me, ante up. So it doesn't matter how much money he made. The earnings he made were never sufficient because he always had that anxiety in the back of his head. Anyways, he was buying luxuries, nice stuff, okay? But his earnings, his income, however substantial it might be, it never made him feel at ease. He always had anxiety deep in his heart. By the way, if you are anxious or if you have anxiety, that means you are worried and nervous. If you have anxiety, you think something bad is going to happen to you in the future.
Anxiety, that's the noun. And to feel anxious is the adjective. Boy, I feel really anxious about tomorrow's speech. I'm really nervous about it. I have some anxiety about that. So here, Tom had this anxiety because he knew someday that Old Scratch would come for the rest of his payment. Remember, Old Scratch is now his master, and Tom doesn't really know what that payment is going to be. So, yeah, we'll find out later on as our story continues. So let's move on now to the second part. We will listen first.
As Tom aged, he turned to religion in the hope that it would spare him from his fate, but no amount of piety could change his natural traits. One day, he was arguing with a client about a debt, and the man accused Tom of making a fortune off him. "The devil take me," exclaimed Tom indignantly, "if I've ever made a farthing."
第二部分，我们看到单字 trait， 这个字是名词，指个人的特征或是特点。例如 Beatrice inherited traits from both her parents. Green eyes from her father and big ears from her mother. Beatrice 遗传到双亲的特征，爸爸的绿眼睛和妈妈的大耳朵。或是 One of the traits of this dog breed is that it rarely barks. 这种狗的特点之一是它不太会叫。接着我们看到单字 indignantly， 这个字是副词，指愤怒的或是愤慨的，像是 Eva indignantly stated that she wouldn't agree to that solution. Eva 愤怒地回答说她不会同意那个解决办法。
Okay, so Tom, he's got this anxiety. He's making tons of money, but he's never sure if that's going to be enough to make Old Scratch happy. Anyways, as Tom aged, he turned to religion in the hope that it would spare him from his fate. But no amount of piety could change his natural traits. So he's got this anxiety, and he knows something bad's going to happen to him, or he feels like something bad is going to happen to him, so he turns to religion. He goes to church, prays, does all that stuff, and he's hoping that this will spare him from his fate, i.e., he hopes he can escape his fate by going to church.
That sounds like a logical way to proceed about things. Just turn to God, turn to Jesus, and accept the Savior in His name, and you should be okay, and the devil will not be able to control you anymore. So that's what he was thinking here. Hey, I'll turn to religion. I'll go to church. I'll pray to God. I'll get on my knees, and maybe I will be spared from my fate. So here we've got the verb to spare, which means you will be forgiven and you won't have to suffer the way you were supposed to before. This might happen sometimes if you're accused of a crime in a communist country, and you might say, oh, spare my life. I didn't mean it. Please let me live. Don't execute me. And so here he wanted maybe God to spare him so that he doesn't have to be the slave of the devil.
Or something like that. I get the feeling, though, that something bad is going to happen. Anyways, here Tom wants to be spared his fate. He thinks his fate's going to be a bad one, but no amount of piety could change his natural traits, i.e., it doesn't matter how churchy or religious he became. He couldn't change who he truly was at heart. He's still a greedy, nasty kind of guy. Anyways, piety. If you are pious, that means you're a good little boy. You say your prayers before bed. You say your prayers before meals. You go to church and you go to Sunday school and you act like a really good moral kid. You show all the virtues that your parents would want you to if you are pious or if you have piety.
Yep, he could say he loves Jesus till he's blue in the face, but he's still rotten to the core, and therefore it's not going to save him, and he's still going to go to hell and be the slave of the devil. So yes, indeed, he could not change his natural characteristics or traits, and one day he was arguing with a client about a debt, and the man accused Tom of making a fortune off him. So, yes, indeed, he was dealing with a client here, and the client was angry at Tom, and he was accusing Tom of making a fortune off him. Hey, you're just making tons of money off me. You're not really trying to help me. And here we've got the verb to accuse. That just means you say to someone else that you think they did something bad. You are formally saying that they did something bad. I accuse you of stealing my Ferrari.
So here the man says, Tom, you have been making a fortune off of me and my debt. This is just not right. I'm accusing you of being a bad lender. And then, in response to this, the devil take me, exclaimed Tom indignantly, if I've ever made a farthing. So there you go. He's fighting with this guy. This person has a debt, and Tom probably has made a fortune off of him, but he's going to lie about it because he's a bad and greedy guy. He uses this expression, devil take me, I've never made a farthing. I've never made a penny off of you. And he says this indignantly. By the way, if you exclaim something, you say that loudly. You want to get someone's attention, definitely. And if you say something indignantly, you act like you are really, really offended by what someone has just said to you.
Exactly. So, yeah, I'm very sure I'm innocent here, so I don't have to worry about the devil actually taking me to hell. And that's what he exclaimed. That's what he said out loud. And a farthing here, that's an old term for an old coin. I believe it's 1/4 the value of a penny. So a farthing just basically means a very, very low value of something. In this case, a very low value coin.
Anyways, the devil take me, exclaimed Tom indignantly. This is not going to end well. Maybe the devil himself might just show up pretty soon. Anyways, though, for right now, it's time for us to take a short break. But don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
No sooner had Tom uttered these words than there was a loud knock on the door. On opening it, Tom briefly took in the sight of Old Scratch riding a black horse before being abruptly whisked away, never to be seen again. No one looked for him because they all knew the devil always gets his due.
最后第三部分，我们看到副词 abruptly 指突然的或是意外的，例如 The man walking in front of me stopped abruptly and I almost ran into him. 走在我前面的人突然停下来，害我差点撞到他。另外，这个字去掉字尾 ly 就成了形容词 abrupt， 指突发的或是意外的。举例来说 The unpopular TV series came to an abrupt end when it was cancelled. 那个不受欢迎的电视影集被取消了，就这么突然结束。或是 The lecturer gave an abrupt answer to Simon's comment. 讲师对 Simon 的言论冷不防回了话。
Okay, let's continue to summarize our story here, and we'll wrap things up now. No sooner had Tom uttered these words than there was a loud knock on the door. So no sooner just means basically as soon as Tom uttered these words, right at the moment that he said these things, there was a knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? So, yes, indeed, to utter here just means to say something. It's not used that often. You wouldn't say, hey, what did Lisa utter to you yesterday? You only use this in certain circumstances. Like, for example, one time I was asking the boss of a company, whatever happened to Mr. Lee? Yeah, whatever happened to Mr. Lee? Well, the boss was very angry. Don't you ever utter Mr. Lee's name in this office again. Because I guess Mr. Lee stole some money from the company, and now he's got a bad reputation. So yeah, never utter his name again. Don't say his name again.
Mr. Lee sounds a whole lot like Tom Walker. Not a nice guy at all.
Indeed, I think maybe that's what I was thinking about. But in any case here, yes, Tom said this, the devil take me, if I ever made a farthing. And then there was a knock on the door, and on opening it, or upon opening it, as soon as Tom opened the door, Tom briefly took in the sight of Old Scratch. There's that peculiar-looking guy covered in soot. He was riding a black horse before being abruptly whisked away. That's referring to Tom here. Of course, Tom was abruptly whisked away, never to be seen again. So abruptly here is an adverb. It just describes when something happens rather quickly, unexpectedly.
There you go. So immediately, without any hesitation, Old Scratch grabbed Tom and whisked him away on this black horse. And Tom was never to be seen again. And get this, no one looked for him because they all knew the devil always gets his due. Translated as, don't mess with the devil. It's just not going to work out. He's super powerful, very clever, very sneaky. You're not going to win or get the better side of a bargain with the devil. All right, folks, with that, it's time for us to hear from the Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分的第一句他写到 As Tom aged, he turned to religion in the hope that it would spare him from his fate, but no amount of piety could change his natural trait. Tom 老的时候他就求助于这个宗教，希望能让他躲过宿命，但是虔诚却无法改变他的本性。好，我们这边来看三个重点。第一个是片语 turn to， 它后面可以接人或是事物来表达寻求某人或某事物的帮助啊、支持或者是请教某人的意思。像我们可以说 She always turns to her parents for advice. 她总是会向爸妈来寻求建议。那另外我们也可能会看到在 turn to 后面它接了像 drugs, alcohol 等等这种比较负面的东西，那这往往是指可能因为不开心而开始使用毒品啊、酒精等等来寻求慰藉，像是 Mark turned to alcohol after his wife left him. Mark 在他妻子离开他之后开始酗酒。好，再来看到第二个重点是 in the hope 或是 in hope，或者是可以说 in hopes， 这些用法呢后面都可以接 that 子句，或者是接 of 加上名词或动名词来表达说期盼怎么样，抱持着什么样的希望。例如 He drove around the block again in hopes of finding a parking space. 他开车再绕一次那个街区，希望能够找到停车位。第三个重点是要讲 no amount of something， 它是表达再多的、再大量的什么什么都无法怎么样。那它常常会搭配助动词 will, can 或是 could， 或者是搭配 be going to 等等。那我们来造两个例句哦。No amount of money can make up for their loss. 再多的金钱也没办法弥补他们的损失。No amount of negotiation is going to work. 再多的这个谈判协商啊，都是没有用的。好，那读到课文第三部分的第一句，他说 No sooner had Tom uttered these words than there was a loud knock on the door. Tom 此话一出，就传来很大的这个敲门声响。好，那这个句子呢，它是用到 no sooner had 主词加上过去分词 PP than， 然后后面接一个过去式子句，这是用来表达说某事才刚发生，另一件事就接踵而来。那我们其实也可以用 hardly 或者是 scarcely， 然后后面加 had 加上主词再加 PP， 再接 when 或是 before 去引导的过去式子句来表达差不多的意思。那特别注意我们刚刚说的这两种句型呢，它们都是因为否定副词摆在句首，那这时候主要子句就必须倒装咯，所以你才会看到这个助动词 had 它跑到主词前面了。好，举例来说No sooner had we left the convenience store than it started raining. 也可以说 Hardly had we left the convenience store when it started raining. 我们一离开那间便利商店就开始下雨了。诶，同学们有没有听到关键字一怎么样就怎么样？你是不是就马上想到 as soon as 的用法呢？好，那我们其实也是可以用 as soon as 或是 once 或者是 the instant、the minute, the moment 等等来引导一个时间副词子句去表达一怎么样就怎么样。所以刚刚那个例句更简单的讲法，你就是说 As soon as we left the convenience store, it started raining. 好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Earnings. Raymond dislikes having to spend so much of his earnings on rent. Anxiety. Jenna's anxiety increased as Gary sped up to catch the red light. Spare. The bell rang and Tim was spared from having to give his presentation. Trait. Pauline's generosity is just one of the traits that set her apart from her brother. Accuse. Randy accused his wife of not helping enough with the housework. Exclaim. What a beautiful puppy, Susan's daughter exclaimed happily. Utter. After Geraldine broke up with her boyfriend, she refused to utter his name. Abruptly. Thomas abruptly stood up and walked out of the cafe.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Okay, here's our discussion starter for today. Washington Irving's story depicts a deal with the devil. What do you think the central themes in the story are, and what do you think the moral of the story is?
I think the central themes of this particular story have to do with our inner traits, our inner flaws, and how we can't escape fate because of these, okay? The moral of the story is obviously don't make a deal with the devil, okay? And the reason things worked out so poorly for Tom in the end is that he was willing to make that deal with the devil. It was within his nature, within his capacity to do such a thing, and that led to his downfall and his bitter end.
Well, the themes of good and evil feature heavily in Irving's story here, and given the ending, I think the moral is you have to realize that sometimes the devil wins no matter what you do, but even if you try to turn to religion, you're still doomed.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end. and I sure hope you guys enjoyed reading and learning along with us. I am Jeff.
I am Roger.
See you next time.